He is District 6 Little League. And I'd like to thank Joe for all of his help as a liaison for the chamber and the nonprofit. I'd also like to give a thanks to Giselle Silva, who is the intern, who is behind all of the marketing and all the materials behind the scenes. We thank you for all of your help. I'd like to also thank the Small Business Council, Dan Meredith and Nina Tucker, for all of their help with these webinars every month. I'd like to say hello to Erica. Welcome back to the nonprofit committee. We're so excited to have you as a speaker today. We've enjoyed having you on the nonprofit committee for a couple of years that I've been on it as well. I'm going to turn it over to Erica right now so she could begin speaking wonderful things from her mind. And if you want to ask any questions, you can ask them, but hold off. We're going to do the answering at the end.
We're actually going to just ask the Small Business Council can also say a few words. Dan or Meredith.
Yeah,
Dan Meredith or Nina Tucker.
Okay. Dan, Nina.
Morning. Nina?
After you. Thanks for teaming up with us this morning, and great to see this wonderful turnout. Look for a survey that we're going to be sending out shortly to find out how we can help you in 2021. So we are looking forward to your answers.
And I would just like to thank Denise and Jeff for having us along for this. Erica is going to be great today. Happy holidays, everyone. Take a look out for that survey. We're looking to do more with the Small Business Council to come in 2020. We'd like to know what you'd like us to do. So here we go. Thank you.
Am I on? Thank you, everyone. This is a wonderful introduction. It is so good to be back at the Meadowlands Regional Chamber. The chamber has been such a big part of the early career development that I had in nonprofit. Being a part of the nonprofit committee, as an ambassador, it is such a strong community of professionals and just flat out fantastic humans that have really remained friends to me to this day. So when Jeff asked me to come and speak, it was just really a no-brainer for me, just a no-brainer. And I could not think of a more important conversation for us to be having today than a conversation about compassion. It's so relevant to the state of our world that's calling us to a higher version of ourselves. And compassion helps us answer that call. So I'm going to share with you today my compassion story, and I'm going to give you some practical tips that I developed to start implementing compassion into my life. And this may not be a typical how-to that you can kind of check off your list, because I know we're all A-type how-to people. We want to know how to get it done and how to do it and how to do it fast, right? But this compassion is not an intellectual exercise. It's something that must be felt. It's something where I'm going to have to ask you to go a little bit deeper than maybe some other speakers have asked you to go. So please do use the chat. You can go ahead and type in there that you're ready to go a little bit deeper. Let me know what's coming up for you, and we'll get to everything by the end for sure. So I've always been in compassion work. At least I felt. I've dedicated my entire life and career in nonprofit that I feel have been built on compassion. But I don't think I truly understood compassion until I became a caretaker. My grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia many years ago, but there came a point in her illness where she just literally couldn't care for herself anymore. And I elected to move in with her and my grandfather to help support in her care. And if you know anyone with Alzheimer's, you know what a cruel disease it is, and that it's really more than memory loss. It's hallucinations, it's delusions, it's mood swings, cognitive decline, and at some point you just stop being able to brush your own teeth and dress yourself and just take care of the things that are normal in your life. And when I moved in, there was this pivotal moment where I first truly recognized compassion. It was right around this time, about 3 years ago. And, her illness was bad, but it wasn't so advanced yet as it is now that we could still kind of go out. So it was Christmas time. We went shopping, and she loves to shop. This woman likes to shop. And she hadn't really been out. We weren't exchanging Christmas presents like we used to in the family. So we went out and we went shopping, and it really felt like old times. Like she was like, oh, let me get this little thing for you. We're going to put stuff in the cart. And honestly, guys, there was nothing in the cart for anybody for Christmas. It was all for her, which was totally fine. So I think we were at Home Goods. So the cart's filled. So we go on the line, and, I'm taking the stuff out of the cart, and I hear the clerk say, that'll be $240. And I'm just doing the thing, and it's a really long pause. And so I look over at her, and she's just looking down at her wallet. And I can see on her face that she doesn't know what to do and that she's scared. And I just look over at her and I say, do you need help? And she just does one of these and says yes. And it was at that moment that I realized that our relationship from granddaughter to grandmother had shifted. That she was no longer my parent. She helped raise me. She was no longer my caretaker, my provider. Although I was in my 30s, I could feel myself be scared. I was like, oh no, what am I going to do without her, without my friend, without her advice, without when I'm scared or when things are going wrong or emotionally when I need support or financially. And in that moment, I grieved her. I grieved who we were to each other. And so I took the money from her hands. And as I counted each bill, I felt the little girl in me get smaller and smaller and replaced by the woman in me. And like Alice, I grew into my responsibilities almost instantaneously. And it was the first time that I felt my ego shift to make room for this higher version of myself, calm and purposeful and poised and ready. And I think that that's what compassion does, is it calls us to this higher version of ourselves. And honestly, guys, as powerful as that moment was for me, as it sticks out in my memory, it's not what really pulled me into compassion. It was just the beginning of understanding that. Because it was easy to see my grandmother in that moment and say, okay, I see her suffering. I want to help. I want to do something, right? Where I really learned compassion was in the moments when she would wake me up in the middle of the night at 1 a.m. and refuse to go back to sleep because she didn't know where she was. Or when she was afraid that the strange man in the house that she had forgotten was my grandfather was going to hurt her, so we had to hide all the knives in the house. Or when she's cursing and hitting me because she thought I was stealing the things in her room and that people were just taking things from her. How do you find compassion then? And think for yourself, you may have not had an experience this extreme, but where in your life do you just not, you don't want to be loving and compassionate? I mean, like consciously you do, but when faced in the situation, you're just not. And that can feel really helpless. These are the moments. These are the moments, the situations when we don't want to be compassionate, we don't want to be loving because we don't think we can or it's not justified. These are the moments that matter the most. And what I learned is that the acknowledgement of seeing pain and suffering is the call to love. So it's important to ask ourselves, where can we see and acknowledge someone else's suffering as well as our own in order to open, right? And open to love. And it was in answering these questions for myself that led me to want to be a coach, right? Particularly in this area. And because I know that compassion is always present. It's never that we don't have it. It's that we create blocks to accessing it. And we have this innate capacity to love, but we aren't living from it. We aren't actualizing it. And if we rise to this challenge and just face the blocks that are in the way, then we can see how we can transform our relationships. And I know because I've seen it firsthand. Compassion is not exclusive to one area of our lives, right? It's in all areas. We are very good at decompartmentalizing home and work and our spiritual lives. This is when I meditate, and this is when I go to church, and this is what I do at work, and this is what I do at home. And none of those things previously to 2020 have collided, right? Emotion is still an uncomfortable topic in corporate culture. Do emotions belong in the workplace? And what are your perceptions and feelings about feelings at work? What judgments do you have? I don't know, it's Christmas time, so I'm all like, you know, Hallmark Christmas special and like Christmas movies. So I don't know if you've seen, you probably have, You've Got Mail. It's one of my favorites. You can't go wrong with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan at all. And if you know the original, it's the shop around the corner with Jimmy Stewart. So fun fact. So this is a great movie. Meg Ryan is the small bookshop owner, right? And then Tom Hanks is the Barnes and Nobles, the Fox Books that's trying to take over. And he puts her out of business, right? And so he comes over and he says, look, it's not personal, it's business. And she goes, what the heck? What does that even mean? She goes like, it's not personal to you, but it's personal to me. And what's so wrong with being personal? Whatever anything is, it ought to start by being personal. And so, yeah, maybe you've heard it's not professional to be vulnerable or professional to be emotional. And maybe that it's not professional, but that employee engagement in our corporate culture has just lacked an emotional dimension up till now. It's just that there's never been a really tidy, nice way of confronting workplace emotions. There's no safe container for it, to hold space for it, right? So if anything is going to force us to confront issues of emotion in a work culture, it's a global pandemic and a spotlight on systemic racism. Thank you, 2020. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we can't have a conversation about compassion without first addressing suffering, right? It's super important. And 2020 has been a year we have witnessed and experienced a tremendous amount of suffering that people are still bearing right now. We're living in a time of illness, disease, political toxicity, systemic racism, and not all of us know what to do with that. We're coming off of a summer of racial injustice that resulted in riots, and people are bringing deep sorrow, frustration, and fear to work, virtually or not. And that has everything to do with work and nothing to do with work. And even before 2020, right, in work settings, people were feeling discouraged and undervalued and like their skills weren't acknowledged. And they were bringing their personal setbacks of divorce and injury or health-related issues. Emotional upheaval spills into the workplace and impacts performance. It does because we're human. The thing is that as coworkers and employers, we remain silent in the face of suffering, either because we think work life and home life should be separate, or because we fear of making a mistake in offering support. In quarantine, right, home and work life have been forced together. We can't help it, right? We need to create safe spaces and invite a culture of compassion into our professional lives because we're being forced to. And the latter part of that, making a mistake and offering support, is so true now around our discussions around race and diversity. I had a great discussion yesterday with the Association of Fundraising Professionals in New York City on diversity in the workplace. And, not people being afraid to say the wrong thing. And so therefore, we're not answering that call to compassion. We can't afford to do this anymore. We can't afford to stay silent. There is too much at stake. Even the Dalai Lama had said that love and compassion are necessities to humanity and that we cannot survive without them. This is why suffering is so important to this conversation, because compassion is literally the response to suffering. We can't be compassionate unless we first acknowledge that suffering exists. This is where I invite your participation a little bit. This acknowledging suffering is not an intellectual exercise. It's internal. It needs to be felt with the heart. So I really want to invite everybody listening to go inward with me and meet suffering here. I want you to feel this so it carries through the rest of our conversation. So whatever you're doing right now, just stop and take a moment. Take a deep breath and slow down. If you want, you can close your eyes or you can just gaze down at the floor in front of you. Just find a space in your heart where you can open to suffering now. Take a look, and what do you see? What suffering are you experiencing right now? What do you feel? Now imagine that suffering in the world, and that most of that suffering is hidden. Now what do you see? Because pain is always present. We're so conditioned not to see it at work, at home. Mostly what we see are the masks that people wear. We mistake simple expressions of suffering for something else. You know, suffering looks like many things. It can look like anger. It can look like withdrawal. It can look like impatience. Suffering can look like denial. It can look like the forced heaviness, forced smile of heavy happiness. It can look like manipulation or indifference. Suffering can look like loneliness or even a lashing out. And to acknowledge suffering puts us in a place of just uncertainty. And fear of uncertainty really blocks us from seeing what's there. We feel like we need to fix, solve, or avoid suffering, but yet simply being with it is what allows space for compassion to exist. How might we be causing suffering? Where are we perpetuating suffering by trying to fix, solve, or avoid? In our relationships, in our social systems? What are we failing to see that's causing pain or suffering in our neighbors? Compassion must engage with suffering in order to be applied. If you have your eyes closed, go ahead and open them. And whatever came up for you, just use it as a point of contemplation. You know, just to acknowledge what you're feeling inside as well as what you're seeing on the outside. Because suffering goes unseen most of the time. There's this hidden threat of suffering kind of always bubbling underneath the surface that we just need to get rid of it. But really, it's our greatest capacity to love. If you take away anything from this conversation, is that suffering is not a threat. It's our greatest capacity to love. It is literally our superpower to self-evolution and transforming our personal and professional relationships. And this is where I've developed this process. And over the past year, I've been putting it into play for myself. I've been using it every day to open myself to compassion and use it as a caretaker and use it in my professional relationships. And it has really opened me up. And I'm excited because this is the first time I'm actually sharing it publicly. I've done a lot of compassion talks and webinars, but I haven't shared this exact process. And so I'm rolling it out with you guys for the first time. And so the process is 5 simple steps that spell out peace, right? P-E-A-C-E, peace. And the P in peace is pause. So when something painful pops up in our lives, it's usually something that we want to get rid of. Whenever something painful happens, we usually want to get rid of it. We have a mindset to pain that it's this threat, right? And then usually we're reacting from it. And you can relate to this, right? And when we react, we're usually like, we're combative, we're fighting, we're trying to get out of the situation, we're flight, or we're paralyzed to do anything, and we kind of in denial and we give up and we're freezing, right? The thing is that when we're reacting, it's super primal. So it's all unconscious. So when all that emotional unconscious stuff comes up to the surface and we bring it into our workplace relationships, our home relationships, our friendships without even realizing it, right? And the pause, what it allows us to do is shut off that automatic response of just reacting and just break our state, right? And so I'm going to ask, I'm sure you're thinking your question that I ask myself is like, Erica, honestly, when I'm triggered, my kids are screaming at me and somebody's, really getting under my nerves at work. How do you want me to remember to pause? How do you want me to remember to do that? Because doesn't seem like there's much space in between being triggered and your response, right? So here's the secret sauce to that, is that our mindset has been previously to think of pain and discomfort as something we want to get rid of. Well, in pause, I flip that on its head. It's the trigger itself that is your compassion alarm clock. It's ringing. It's telling you to wake up and pay attention. Now, look, you can hit snooze if you want. I want to go back to sleep. I'm going to hit snooze, and I'm just going to react unconsciously. I'm just going to just do what I always do and react unconsciously. Or you can answer the call and wake up to whether it's for yourself or for others and hear pain and discomfort as that call for love to wake up. And that's what pause does. That's what pause flips it on its head. So we're going to pause. After you pause, this is the E. This is where we're going to explore. Now that I'm awake, okay, I've answered the call, I'm waking up, I'm paying attention. My trigger has told me to do this. So now what the heck am I paying attention to, right? So in this case, usually there's a presenting problem and then there's a greater problem, right? I symbolize this as like almost like our emotions, this sort of gut thing that's under the surface, right? And usually we're fighting over a presenting problem or we have a conflict with a presenting problem. And the greater problem really never gets resolved because we're up here, we're on the surface, right? So what is my trigger really trying to tell me? Well, how do I engage with this trigger now and allow myself to go there and kind of, this is where I meet suffering head on. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Dan Siegel. He's an interpersonal neurobiologist. So the interpersonal part of interpersonal neurobiology in what Dan Siegel says is that the something that happens between us is directly related to what happens within us. So what does that mean? So that means that our internal state dictates how deeply we connect with others, right? And so there's two types of internal states. One is receptive, right? So this is receptivity, I'm open, right? This is where compassion and love are allowed to be there because your state of being is open and allowing things to enter, right? And then there's reactive, right? This is when we're triggered. We're usually in a reactive state. This is where we're really closed. And when we're reactive, it's because we feel threatened. And our responses are usually this fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm sure you've heard that a million times. And we'll get into some examples. So our ability to awaken to love and compassion within us is directly related to how our ability to keep our heart open, right? And so in Explore, we're really assessing our internal state here. Are we open or closed? And how is that having an effect on my ability to be open and meeting myself or another person with compassion? So I'm going to give you an example of what happened to me. And I'll give you the first example of how this became very apparent for me with my grandmother. We were having a really rough month. Her delusions were off the wall and she required constant attention. There wasn't a moment even using the bathroom where I could be separated from her. And so I found myself avoiding her, for as bad as that sounds. I was locking myself in my room. I was finding spaces to hide. And eventually I was like, I can't go on like this. I have to interact with her. So I had to meet my suffering. So I met it there. And what I realized was that I was feeling helpless, but I couldn't fix or solve what was going on. She was so afraid all the time. She wanted to leave. She didn't know where she was. And I couldn't do anything about it. I really felt helpless. And so I was really protecting myself from feeling that pain of helplessness. There was a whole process I went through in peace to do this. And this was really early on. So my state was reactive. I was avoiding. I was totally in flight. I was totally avoiding her. So I asked myself, what do I need? And what I needed to know was that it wasn't my job. It wasn't my job to fix her. It wasn't. I just had to give myself permission that it was okay if I just showed up and I was just there, no matter what happened. And so as soon as I did that, I literally felt an energy of an opening. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but just an energy of an opening. And when that happened, now 2 minutes later, swear to God, she knocked on the door and she came running in and she was crying and she's hysterical. And like she had, again, she's feeling threatened by my grandfather. She thought he was a stranger in the house. She's really scared. But now my heart is open. This is a different situation now. And this amazing thing happened and I watched it. It's like, I like literally saw her pain and hysteria, like as this thing that was like separate, and saw her as saw it separate from her. And what I realized was that her pain, her hysteria, all of this stuff was a manifestation of what she believed, that my grandfather was going to, this was a stranger, was going to hurt her, not who she was. It was a manifestation of what she believed, not who she was. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. And none of my stuff was involved. I could see her and meet her. And because my heart was open, my intuition told me exactly what I needed to say. I don't remember what the heck I said. And she was like, okay. And she went to bed. By the grace of God, I was like, honestly, we've been doing this for weeks. I've been pulling all-nighters. And this was it. I had to open myself up. And then she was responsive and she went to bed. When my heart was closed, I was met with resistance. When we acknowledge suffering in ourselves, it is literally a pathway to loving others. It doesn't matter the situation. So consider in your life, work life or professional, where are you staying closed? And how is that creating suffering in your life? Pain or discomfort? Once we pause and explore, now we're kind of, we've met ourselves. So now we can acknowledge and take ownership. That's our A. So when we know our thoughts and feelings and perceptions, we can acknowledge and meet ourselves. So in neurolinguistic programming, that's the type of coaching I'm specialized in. Milton Erickson is a grandfather of this, and he talks about cause and effect, right? So cause, when somebody is in cause, like a state of cause, they are looking at a situation from a lens of ownership and creativity and solutions. They see choices, right? And when we're in effect, this state, I'm blaming, shaming, justifying, I'm in lack, fear, security. I feel like I have no choices. Why does these two states occur? Well, guess what? Sometimes we take our beliefs, right? We're so dug in. We take our beliefs as law. It's the law, right? So if let me take this pen, for example. If I drop this pen, gravity is going to bring it to the ground. Scientific fact, law, right? Great. So X plus Y equals Z, no matter what. Well, we apply the same formula to our lives. It doesn't quite work that way, right? So if I apply this formula in my own life, I think I have no options, because if I drop this pen, it's going to fall. No options, right? So when it comes to behavior of ourselves, that's not true. So I'm not going to kick my dog, but just as an example, if somebody kicked the dog, right? The dog could respond in a multitude of ways. Could respond by biting, could respond by curling up in a ball, by doing nothing, by barking, by running away, by jumping. I mean, there's a whole host of options here, right? There's a whole host of options. And when we move into cause, we can start seeing that. We can start seeing that there are other options and choices. So I had this client, and I was working with her, and her presenting problem, right, was that she came in and she was like, I need a new job. I need a new job. I was like, okay, well, let's dig a little bit deeper. I can help you with that, right? So she was in effect. My manager's not supportive. They're not helping me prioritize my responsibilities, and I can't talk to her about it because nothing will change. People keep coming to me from outside of my department and giving me, she was an executive assistant, giving me responsibilities. And she was like, I have to say yes to all this stuff. And so her behavior was actually to just take on the work, not talk to the manager, and silently be looking for another job. How many of your employees might be doing that? Are you aware of that? How is that happening for you in your life? When we dug a little bit deeper, we came to realize is that she came from another country. She was an immigrant as a child, and she didn't speak the language. So much of not speaking up was surrounding these initial issues where she was shut down and made fun of as a kid for the language barrier. She also kind of came to the country without any choice. She was told to come here, and she had friends at home where she was really outgoing, and she came here without speaking the language. And when she talked to her mom about wanting to go home, nothing was done, and her mom dismissed it. And so she developed a belief that expressing yourself never gets you anywhere. She also watched her brother get deported. So she has this belief if she doesn't work hard, she's going to get deported. So she has to say yes to everything. She took her beliefs as law. If I talk to my manager, I won't get anywhere. Law. If I don't work hard, if I don't say yes to everything that people are throwing at me, I'm going to get fired and I'm going to get deported. Is that really the only option? And so when we started to reframe this stuff from her, some of it's on an unconscious level, some of it's on a conscious level, but consciously when we started to reframe some of it, we could get her from moving from affect, blaming her manager, to saying, oh, wow, okay, I see where this is coming from now, and I can take ownership and responsibility. And now I can see that there are other options. How can I start showing up for myself? Where am I not supporting myself? Where am I not listening to myself? And we started to build a plan for her to start reframing those beliefs so she could start listening to herself and meeting her own needs at work and communicating to her boss and her colleagues. So she wasn't overwhelmed and she didn't have to look for another job if she didn't want to. What person or situation are you allowing to have you be in effect? And how is that hurting your relationships or what you want for yourself? You know, if she wants to stay at that job, guess what? She's looking because she hasn't met herself there, right? So she's now taking ownership and responsibility. So that's acknowledging. And then we move into C, which is curiosity. Once we're at cause, right, and we're taking ownership and we've met ourselves, just the sheer acknowledgement of knowing your own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, you can move into curiosity because you're in an open state and receptivity. When I'm not weighed down by like fighting my own pain or my own triggers, I'm open to see triggers or suffering in others and respond differently because I first met myself there. So now we can start listening to what's going on for other people. Now I'm no longer dug into my point of view, right? It's not law. We've allowed to let that go a little bit and release some of the reins. And now we can see other people, rather than see other people as a problem, we can see it as the call for compassion that it is, right? And so I had one of my friends and colleagues, right? He had this guy, this was years ago at work, where he was like, I literally cannot do anything right with this guy. He criticizes me all the time. He definitely doesn't value me. And he was like using power displays at work to make my friend Carson feel like he wasn't important, right? So then Carson, right, he's a coach as well. He had to look with curiosity at what was going on here after he met his own value issues, right? First, he was feeling that he was not valued as an employee, Carson, because he was the youngest one in the company. So he felt like, oh, I'm not valuable because I'm too young to really be valuable here. The colleague who was doing power displays on him, once Carson cleared up his own stuff and was like, okay, that's not true. I met myself, right? He was able to look at his colleague with curiosity, and turns out the deeper issue is that his colleague was feeling like Carson didn't value his experience and expertise. And so he felt like he needed to keep proving his value by using power displays. When Carson cleaned up his thing, he was able to meet his colleague differently, show up differently, and it transformed their relationship. So that he ended up, when he did leave, coming back as a consultant and being hired as a consultant later. It's huge. And so this brings us to E. And this is it. This is really it. This is where we evolve our communication, right? So this is total mindset shift as a result of these other steps. Once we've paused and we've met our own triggers by seeing our triggers as a compassion alarm clock that wakes us up to pay attention, then we can explore our own thoughts and feelings and be in an open and receptive state without judgment. And then acknowledging and taking ownership where we've met ourselves with compassion and shined a light on our own suffering, then we can move from cause and start seeing solutions to our own situation. And then meeting others with curiosity, because the blocks to love have been removed. So now compassion is free, so that we can look at somebody else and see what's truly happening behind the surface without coming to them with our own stuff. And this is where we revolve our conversations, right? Where we can approach our relationship and our conversations and have courageous, like I like to call courageous conversations, the conversations that we're icky and we don't really want to have. Like I didn't want to face my grandmother, but once I was open, the conversation was pretty easy and effortless. But it wasn't before for weeks. Literally, I think this is a great example, and I'll give this one example before we start closing up. This just happened 2 days ago. So this is the power of this. So I was producing a video for the Association of Fundraising Professionals in New York for this diversity webinar that we put on yesterday. And I'm in conversations with the videographer, and he's asking me to give him like direct answers to how he wants the titles and how I want certain edits done. And we're like going in circles, and I can feel like he's frustrated, I'm frustrated. I'm like, we've been on the phone for an hour. I was like, we're not getting anywhere. What is happening? So I was like, I feel frustrated. Oh, pause. I like literally did this, pause. And so I paused and I met my frustration. I said, what is happening here? And I listened and I was like, he's asking me for direct answers and I'm not giving him a direct response. Why am I not giving him a direct response? And the truth is that if I gave him a direct answer to, yes, make this cut, make this edit, put the title this way, and the video didn't come out right, I was going to look incompetent to my colleagues at AFP. And I just joined the board. And I was like, oh, damn, Erica. I was like, okay. So as soon as I did that, I was like, like, what do you need? So I met my need. And I realized that, okay, if I make a decision, then, hey, I'm going to make this decision. I'm going to justify it. I trust myself. That was it. I was like, I wasn't trusting myself because I was insecure. So I met my trust and I said, if I make this decision, then okay, great. Then I'll back it up. So then I started giving him concrete decisions in that moment. And it really evolved our conversation, right? Because then he started asking, then I started asking him questions about why he wanted things a certain way. And so I was getting a really clearer picture of like, okay, this is why it needs to be exact because here's how he does it on his end. So rather than go in circles, we were getting more clarity and understanding. And we both valued and appreciated each other to begin the conversation. So that's why I kind of knew too, like, okay, something else is going on here. Where can I meet myself? And I took myself through all those steps and it really transformed our conversation from being something really frustrating where we weren't getting anything accomplished to then changing and getting what needed to get done in a time crunch to move on. Compassion is not just about actions. It's not about companies putting policies in place to show how much they care about their employees, right? It's actually living it. It starts with us. We have to do the deep work. We just have to. When we evolve, how we evolve ourselves is really by meeting our suffering and discomfort without judgment and criticism. And when we can meet our own needs and show up for ourselves, that's when we can show up for others in a really powerful way. Compassion has the ability to turn our deepest pain into our deepest opportunity for happiness and connection. Where are you noticing suffering in your own personal life or professional life? How can you lean into it instead of avoiding it? And it's in these small things where you watch your relationship suddenly get stronger and you watch yourself start to speak your truth without fear. You start to take risks to live from your purpose instead of settling. And when you're living from compassion, it leads to deeper relationships, that leads to more customers, that leads to more donors, that leads to more money for your business and for your organization. And I developed this peace process because compassion is not a one-time event. right? We're coming up against this every day, every moment of our lives. We are literally called to compassion, to be open and willing to meet our triggers where they are, to embrace the unknown, and allow ourselves to be transformed. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got a lot of benefit out of it. I have a webinar on December 14th that goes into this in way more detail, because I could only do a snippet today, but thank you so much for your time and your attention. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them and have a dialogue. So thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Erica? We can take them either on the chat function, which is on the bottom right, or we can unmute you and you can ask the question directly.
Yeah, don't be shy. You can unmute yourself. I love that I can see people's faces. I'm so used to just being on webinars where it's just me talking and it's like, I'm fine with it. I'm used to looking at the O-ring,
I have a little bit of an embarrassing question. I had to get up and move because somebody else came in my office, and I missed what the name of E is. And I've been
Yes, explore.
E.
Explore.
Explore.
Yep. So this is where we're exploring our own thoughts and feelings, meeting ourselves where we are. So this is where I talked about, like, once we have a trigger, right, and we know we're awake and we know we need to be paying attention, what is it that we should be paying attention to? Well, we need to be paying attention to the fact that, okay, there's usually a presenting problem, but there's usually a greater problem underneath. And we're usually, fighting over the presenting problem, but there's something underneath the surface. So we just need to look a little bit deeper. And this is when I talked about our internal states, our reactive state and our receptive state. And this is really important to being open to compassion, is being in a receptive state of being open. Because if we're triggered, we're reactive, right? We're thinking that we're threatened and that we're coming from a threatened place, and we're often just reacting, right? So exploring allows us to kind of take that step deeper and say, okay, what state am I in, and how can I shift into that open and receptive state? Where am I staying closed? Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Sure.
Erica, one of the other questions that came through was asking you to actually recap the names for each of the piece words.
Absolutely. Peace is pause, right? First, we're pausing. Our trigger, we have a trigger, and it's our spiritual alarm, our compassion alarm clock to kind of wake up and pay attention, right? That's pause. And then we're exploring, right? We're exploring, what am I thinking? What am I feeling right now? And what state am I in? Am I open, right? Or typically when we're triggered, we're reactive, we're closed, right? That's that explore. And then when we acknowledge and take ownership, that's our A. And in acknowledgement and ownership, this is where we really move from blaming, shaming, justifying what other people are doing, or even ourselves, blaming, shaming ourselves, and we move to ownership, which is cause, where we can start to see solutions. We're not taking our beliefs as law, right? We're questioning those so that we can be open, right? Because we're in an open state. So that's acknowledging and taking ownership. And then the C is curiosity, right? Curiosity is then I can start meeting, because now I've met myself. I've met myself where I am. Now I can meet others with curiosity and be like, okay, well, if they're not really attacking me, then what's really going on here? Oh, I can be curious about it. Now I can ask questions that are curious, because I'm not so dug into my point of view. I don't have to be right. Or even if you don't have to be right, or just thinking like, oh, okay, this is the way it is, right? If I'm not dug in, I can really listen to what's going on. I can see what's behind the mask. When I went through the whole thing about suffering before, and I said it could look like anger, it can look like manipulation, it can look like power displays. That's the mask. We have to look beyond that. Curiosity does that. And then the E is evolve. E is where we start evolving our conversation, our communication with one another, and start transforming our relationships, because our mindset is totally shifted. Our mindset is shifted as a result. And I do a lot of work with people on the unconscious level as well as the conscious level. This is a conscious reframe. As a neuro-linguistic programming professional, I also do hypnotherapy work, and I work with people on the unconscious level too. So some of these people have gone through, that I gave in examples, have gone through breakthroughs that have allowed them to shift their mindset and release some of these beliefs on an unconscious level.
Erica, another question that came through actually from Anita Rivers was, how do you start the conversation when you know there are deeper issues that must be addressed?
Yeah, and that depends on the situation. So the first thing is really acknowledgement, is one, just kind of knowing that it's there and holding space for that. I'm trying to think of a good example. So Anita, and you can write, I'm trying to find your question. Is this if you're in a confrontation with somebody and you know that there's deeper issues, or you just kind of know that there's a colleague, there's some stuff going on? I think that actually the example with and just go ahead and clarify. And what I'm gonna mind read and think that it's just a colleague that is having issues in the office. So like, for example, my friend Carson, when he had that colleague who was having power displays in the office, Carson is a coach himself, right? And this was early in his career, but he kind of knew something was going on under the surface, right? That doesn't mean he's a doormat, but he knew something was going on under the surface. So there's this other thing called perception is projection, and I didn't have time to go into it really deeply today. But that's perception is projection, is looking at how we perceive ourselves is how we're seeing the world, right? So when that happens, if I see myself, right, in that example, Carson saw himself as not a valued employee because he was feeling like he was too young. He was too young to be a valuable employee at that company. And the colleague he was having confrontation with felt as though he didn't value him. He's perceiving that they're projecting on each other the disvalue to one another. When Carson cleaned up his own stuff about value, then his relationship with his colleague changed. I've seen this so many times, time and time. It literally just happened with a client again yesterday when we were on the phone. She cleaned up something with herself about disrespect, and suddenly she started getting respect from a friend that hadn't been respecting her. So I guess I would say to you, Anita, is that one, we have to kind of look at what's going on for ourselves. If we're having a situation of disrespect within the workplace, where am I disrespecting myself? How can I show up for myself with respect? And watch your relationships shift as a result of that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, does anyone else have any questions?
I have one more question. I was typing, but if no one else is typing, how do you switch gears on those crazy days when you want to have compassion for somebody else in the workplace, but it's one of those days that you've been hit from a million different angles and wish you had compassion coming back the other way? How do you stop and be in the moment for that person and stop thinking about yourself?
Yeah, super great. First of all, one is just to remember to give grace to yourself, right? Because in any particular, like even I was on the phone the other day with my colleague and we were going around in circles for a while on the phone before I stopped and went, I'm really frustrated. Oh, I need to pay attention. What's really happening here? And now I've gotten really good at this, of doing this over the past year. So I was able to do this really quickly, right? So when it comes to you're not getting compassion from others, right? And you're in this like crazy chaos work environment. This is where, and I'm going to bring this right back. This is where we need to come to ourselves and say, where do I need to show myself compassion right now? Right? Because one of the other things with this whole thing with AFP was I was starting to, Dan, we talked about this earlier before everybody else came on. As soon as I came back from my travels, my grandfather went into the hospital right away. There was a big family emergency. He had a UTI. it was a real scare. And he came home and I was back to full-time caretaking with him because he couldn't walk on his own and all this stuff. And I was producing this video for AFP, and there was a time crunch, and there were so many things going on that I was literally like, my head was spinning. And when I went in and I met myself, I was like, I haven't asked anyone for help. I'm literally saying that I don't feel supported here, and I'm giving too much time, and I'm doing too much. And I was like, how can I support myself? I was like, I need to ask for help. I haven't asked anybody to step in and take some role from me. So I asked my colleague, I said, you know what? I have visiting nurse and blah, 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 blah coming tomorrow. Can you review these titles? And she did. And it was great. And I didn't have to think about it. So my answer to you is to look where you're not providing that for yourself and meet yourself there and watch how everything shifts around you as a result of it. Watch how time opens up and provides you more space. Watch how people start responding differently to you as a result of that. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you guys for such incredible questions. And if you have more questions, because I know we're running to the end of time, I am going to put my website and my email in the chat. Also, you can follow me on Instagram if you want. If you're on Instagram, I'm pretty active on there. I like posting things that relate to kind of this discussion and what's going on. So I just invite to kind of keep it going, and hopefully we can do this again soon. I do have a webinar next week. Feel free to go on my website and take a look. It's free, you know, if you want to hear more on this topic.
Hey,
Thank
Erica.
you so yeah.
Hey,
go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry. Hey, Eric, thanks so much. I just want to thank you for all the conversations leading up to this presentation this morning. I enjoyed all the conversations we had over the past couple of weeks, and then seeing the culmination of it here this morning. For anyone dealing with, you know, a relative with Alzheimer's, as we both are, the beginning of this was a little bit scary for me because I'm a few years behind where you are. But knowing that other people are going through it, is very helpful, and your strategies are definitely going to come in handy. So thank you so much for doing this morning. Really appreciate it. And definitely put your information, you know, in the chat so people can see that before we sign off.
Hey,
My pleasure.
Hey, Erica, I'd like to make a comment too. First of all, thank you so much for being with us. I put in a note to you before that you've become a rock star, and I'm so proud of your personal journey. Today's discussion was very, very meaningful. I'm sure to more than just a few on this call today. It touched me in a lot of ways because I have been a caretaker now for a couple of years in a number of ways, and I have had members of my family suffer from Alzheimer's. But what's more powerful to me is the correlation between the compassion and your method and its positive effects on our own personal development and our own ability to grow even in our business. And so you know, when you see the topic of this session today, you know, I said to myself, you know what, this is the perfect time to be talking about compassion. And I didn't look at it initially as being more of a business kind of correlation, and it really is tremendous for that. You know, if you think about the comments that people do business with people that they like and people they trust, you can't have likability and trust and credibility without some element of compassion.
Right.
Compassion makes that up. It's that indirect character of that you will possess that will just make you more human in so many ways, and that human view that others will have of you will help them open themselves up to what you are talking about, or what you are selling, or what your company does, or what your mission is, or what your not-for-profit does, all of those things. And so this was really powerful for me today, and I can't be more proud of your personal journey, the fact that you are still actively involved with us in some way, shape, or form. I just wish I wish you the best, and I hope you'll come back and do more of these with us in the not so distant future.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for all of that. I mean, I feel really grateful to the Chamber for so much at the start of my career, and for your mentorship, and for the nonprofit committee, and everybody that's been a part of my career journey. And just, it's amazing to kind of just be back here, and it feels like a family. And so much truth to what you said. I mean, really, compassion allows us to open up to authenticity, and business is all about relationships. It's all about making it personal. And if we're not meeting ourselves and knowing ourselves more deeply, we really can't be authentic with other people. And so, you know, this is the groundwork for that. And I just feel grateful to my grandmother, who has given me so much in my life, and even in her illness has given me even more, apparently, because I was able to make so many connections that has led up to this talk today.
All right. Thank you so much to everyone for attending today. We will be in touch with more initiatives from the nonprofit committee, as well as the Small Business Council too. I'll also be following up today's program with some information about the 501c3s, and also I'll include Erica's contact information in there as well.
Beautiful. Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
So good to see you again, Erica. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Alex. Yep.
We'll talk soon.
Absolutely.
Bye,
Let's
everyone.
definitely connect.